Welcome and thank you for watching Minnesota Housing's Home Investment Partnerships, HOME, and National Housing Trust Fund, NHTF, Bidding and Contracting Requirements tutorial. This brief tutorial will take a high-level look at the bidding and contracting requirements applicable to your project now that you have received HOME and/or National Housing Trust Fund dollars. Minnesota Housing's mission is to provide access to safe, decent, affordable housing and build stronger communities across the state by offering products and services to help Minnesotans buy and fix up their homes and stabilize neighborhoods, communities, and families. Minnesota Housing also supports the development and preservation of affordable rental housing through both the financing and long-term asset management of projects and developments. The agency has also pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that helps stabilize the lives of some of the state's most vulnerable citizens. This tutorial will cover the following topics: federal programs, an introduction to contracting and bidding, explanations and review of Section 3 in minority or women-owned business enterprises, also known and pronounced as MIBI-WIBI, review certifications in the contracting and bidding process, and finally, reporting requirements. HOME and the National Housing Trust Fund are federally funded housing programs that help to preserve and increase affordable rental housing at various rent and income levels. Although there are broader uses for these programs, Minnesota Housing uses this funding for capital investments for new construction and the rehabilitation of multifamily rental housing. The HOME program targets low-income households in Minnesota. The National Housing Trust Fund program targets extremely low-income households in Minnesota, particularly those that have incomes below 30% of area median income. The deeper income targeting of National Housing Trust Fund lends well to supportive housing initiatives throughout the state. Both of these programs are governed by their respective federal regulations. Minnesota Housing is charged with deploying funds and ensuring developers are complying with program requirements. As a receiver of these scarce federal resources, you must comply with all of the program requirements. If you do not, there is potential that your project will lose the funding altogether. Each federal program has its own set of contracting and bidding requirements. For projects with home funds, Davis-Bacon Section 3 and MIBI-WIBI regulations apply to the project. For projects with National Housing Trust Fund funds, Section 3 and MIBI-WIBI apply. If a project has both home and National Housing Trust Fund funds, the home funds will trigger Davis-Bacon applicability. This tutorial will focus primarily on the contracting and bidding requirements specific to Section 3 and MIBI-WIBI. For more detailed information about Davis-Bacon, refer to the Davis-Bacon tutorial on our website. All of the forms referenced are available on our website at www.mnhousing.gov and on your project's checklist in the portal. Section 3 is a provision of the Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Act of 1968. The purpose of Section 3 is to ensure that employment and other economic opportunities generated by certain HUD financial assistance shall, to the greatest extent feasible and consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws and regulations, be directed to low and very low-income persons, particularly those who are recipients of government assistance for housing, and to business concerns that provide economic opportunities to low and very low-income persons. Section 3 regulations can be found at 24 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 135. Section 3 applies to all projects receiving over $200,000 of home and/or National Housing Trust Fund funds. Recipients are evaluated according to how well they meet the following numerical goals with respect to Section 3 covered projects. At least 30% of aggregate new hires of recipients, contractors, and subcontractors for the year are Section 3 residents. At least 10% of the total dollar amount of all Section 3 covered contracts for building trade work is awarded to Section 3 business concerns. At least 3% of the total dollar amount of all other Section 3 covered contracts is awarded to Section 3 business concerns, such as architectural or accounting services required by a construction contract. If the goals are not met, the developer and contractor are required to provide documentation on what procedures they followed to attempt to reach the goals. They will also be required to document what barriers, if any, impacted the failure to reach the goals. More information can be found in the Multifamily Section 3 Compliance Guide, located on our website. More information about reporting will be provided later in this tutorial. It is the policy of Minnesota Housing that minority and women-owned business enterprises, MIBI-WIBI, have equal access to business opportunities resulting from Minnesota Housing Finance developments. This policy addresses marketing and outreach requirements for contracting and purchasing, as described by state and federal procurement laws and regulations. Projects with deferred financing through Minnesota Housing trigger the MIBI-WIBI marketing and outreach requirements and performance goals described in the Multifamily Division Minority or Women Business Enterprises Compliance Guide. The owner and/or developer must take all necessary affirmative steps to ensure that it and its contractors use MIBI-WIBIs when possible for all project-related contract awards that exceed $25,000. Minority business enterprises and women business enterprises, MIBI-WIBI, refer to hiring process goals. Developers and contractors must make a good faith effort that affirmative steps are taken to hire MIBI-WIBI contractors. Minnesota Housing's participation goals are, for MIBI, in the Twin Cities Metro, 13% of the total amount of all contracts, and for Greater Minnesota, 4% of the total amount of all contracts. For WIBI, in the entire state, 6% of the total amount of all contracts. Similar to Section 3, if the goals are not met, developers and contractors are required to provide documentation on what procedures they followed to attempt to reach the goals. They will also be required to document what barriers, if any, impacted the failure to reach the goals. More information in regard to MIBI-WIBI can be found in the Multifamily Section 3 Compliance Guide on our website. More information about reporting will be provided later in this tutorial. Developers and contractors must submit the following certifications, which are all listed as due diligence items in the portal. The due diligence items include links to appropriate forms and reference materials. For the Section 3 Compliance Guide certification, both the developer and the general contractor sign and submit this certification, acknowledging they have reviewed the Section 3 Compliance Guide. For the Section 3 Compliance Checklist, both the developer and the general contractor must fill out and sign it, and it must be filled out and signed prior to releasing the bid package. Signing certifies that you understand all of the Section 3 requirements outlined in the guide. The MIBI-WIBI Compliance Guide certification requires both the developer and the general contractor sign and submit the certification, acknowledging they have reviewed the MIBI-WIBI Compliance Guide. The next slide outlines the contracting and bidding process and what unique items you will need to keep in mind. The following forms are required in all contracting and bidding documents with projects receiving federal funds. The Section 3 clause, which is a clause stating that all parties agree to Section 3 obligations. The Equal Employment Opportunity Policy Statement. The wage decision, when applicable, which only applies when Davis-Bacon is required on the project. And HUD 4010, when applicable. HUD 4010 only applies when Davis-Bacon is required on the project. It states that all parties agree to federal labor standards. For more information specific to Davis-Bacon, you can view the Davis-Bacon tutorial on our website. These documents are required by federal law to be included in the bid package. Your bid package and specs will not be approved for release until Minnesota Housing's Federal Programs Team confirms that they are included. Additionally, these documents are required to be in all professional and construction contracts on federally assisted projects. These include items such as the architect's contract, the general contractor's contract, any relocation company contracts, attorney's contracts, environmental remediation contracts, etc. The developer and all parties are responsible for documenting their files, indicating that all required forms are included in contracts. Note that Minnesota Housing, at its sole discretion, reserves the right to monitor contracts. In addition to the certifications and the forms required in the contracting and bidding process, there are reporting requirements for Section 3 and MIBI-WIBI. The following slides review how data is reported and what happens when goals are not met. Section 3 in MebeWeB data is tracked on the Contract Compliance Activity Report. This Excel report is completed after the bidding closes. The report must include all bidders, not just those who were awarded. The report must be uploaded to the portal as an Excel document. When completing the report, select the most appropriate trade for each contractor. If the Section 3 and MebeWeB goals are not met, the Federal Programs team will request a written letter of explanation as to why Section 3 and MebeWeB businesses either did not apply or were not awarded. Once you complete the Contract Compliance Activity Report, remember to save a copy for your records. Developers are required to submit an updated version of the report at construction completion, indicating any new contractors that were added to the project during construction. In addition to the reporting required in the Contract Compliance Activity Report, Section 3 requires additional annual reporting for all construction contractors that physically worked on the property during the calendar year, if their contract was over $100,000. All contractors with contracts over $100,000 will be required to complete the form regardless of whether or not they are a Section 3 business. If the project spans more than one calendar year, reports will be collected on multiple occasions. Each form must be filled out by the individual contractors. Box 3 should state the final dollar amount of the individual contractor's contract. Your Federal Programs Team representative will provide you with instructions on how to complete the form and which contractors need to provide information. It is recommended that as contractors work on your project, you have them complete the form as their contract ends, so that you do not have to track down the information at a later date. Thank you for watching Minnesota Housing's Contracting and Bidding tutorial for federal programs. Your Federal Programs Team lead is listed in the portal. Feel free to reach out with any questions.